Hello, class. So today we're going to talk about Napoleon Bonaparte, typically just known as Napoleon. Okay, previously, we talked about the French Revolution, and this plays all into that exact time in history, where this very unlikely scenario of Napoleon having such a big impact on world history. So his father is Carlo Buonaparte. And he is from this island of Corsica in the Mediterranean. And Corsica had been independent before, but typically was under control of some sort of Italian area. And right after Napoleon was born, Corsica was conquered by France. And there are people that were really opposed to this and wanted Corsica independence, but Carlo threw his lot in with the French, and eventually he becomes a representative to the court of King Louis. And so, because of these connections, Napoleon is able to be sent to France for an education. His first language is not French. Okay, he speaks Corsican, he speaks Italian, so when he's going to show up, he's going to have an accent. And so he's going to have his French education sent away from home, do this. Eventually, he's going to go to the military academy. Now, what he's doing would typically take 2 years, but his father didn't have the money, so Napoleon did it in 1 year, kind of an accelerated course setup. Now, before the French Revolution, so many things were based on class and birth. And so there was a low ceiling for how far Napoleon could go. And so that's going to block him. But when the revolution comes in, it starts being about merit, not about who your dad is. So there's a whole point where Napoleon goes back to Corsica and has to leave, everything going there. But the next time he's important in our story is the Siege of Toulon. And so this is where French royalists had risen up in the south of France. Okay, they wanted the return of the king. They asked England for help, and so the British Royal Navy took over this area. So Napoleon sent there, and Napoleon adopted a plan to capture a hill where the Republican, as in the revolutionary forces, guns could dominate the city's harbor and force the British to evacuate. And so this assault on the position led to the capture of the city. So it's already showing he has a very keen knack for this type of thing. But things are always changing in the midst of the French Revolution with coups and counter-coups, the Reign of Terror, and all of that. So at one point, Napoleon finds himself under house arrest, possibly being scheduled to be executed, until we got 13 Vendémiaire. Okay, and so this is part of the Republican calendar. They renamed all of the months, these different names. And so this is October 5th, 1795. And what happens is that there is, again, this royalist uprising, and the royalists are marching into Paris. And so the people in charge of the directory, they need someone to help out. So Napoleon gets sprung out of his house arrest. Okay, and they put Napoleon in charge to lead the fight against them. And what they do is he fires artillery into the mob to disperse them. And there's going to be also some British propaganda about him using grape shot here. But this is him proving himself. So this will give Napoleon sudden fame and fortune. Now, he was kind of used as a last resort. The directory is nervous about him, so they go send him away. And we get what's called the First Italian Campaign, in which Italy is not the nation it is today. There's a lot of different countries that have interest in Italy, but Austria is big interest in northern Italy, and France is against Austria in these wars. And so Napoleon is sent there. And one thing Napoleon's going to do is going to go through the Alps here. And this is something that is reminiscent of Hannibal thousands of years back. However, these are really hard areas to get through. There's a reason that no one since Hannibal had tried to go through the Alps. But Napoleon is successful here, heading through. And he's going to make a real name for himself. And so, like, the second picture here has to do where his soldiers were trying to cross a bridge. And this is a very perilous thing because you had to go one by one. You're kind of sitting ducks. Okay. But it's very important to get across the bridge for the river. And what's shown here is Napoleon leading the charge himself and showing that he's willing to fight alongside soldiers. So there's going to be this huge personal loyalty that his soldiers will feel for him. And again, he's simply just pretty good at this. This is where them promoting a merit is helping the French, where a lot of these other armies that are being led by monarchies have these very antiquated systems. So he's going to become even more popular, and he's pushing this himself. He's a good propagandist. He knows what information to send back. He would have loved these pictures. But this makes the directory even more nervous, so they send him away. And he has somewhat of a harebrained scheme about getting Egypt, and they let him do this. So he is with a bunch of ships. They set off in France to go invade Egypt. And at this point, Egypt is under the control of the Ottoman Empire. On the way there, they stop in Malta, and he overthrows the Knights Templar, who have been running the government there for centuries, basically one of the last Crusader states. And then he continues down to Egypt. And he's going to successfully conquer Egypt as well as fighting into parts of Syria. And so you can see here there are some disadvantages that the French face there. They didn't bring enough water, but they do have superior weapons and manpower. You have like the Battle of the Pyramids, where the pyramids are not quite as close as in this picture, but this is in like this same area, this very ancient spot. So the French are successful there. The issue is getting stuff all the way back to France. The British still pretty much control the seas. We get things like Napoleon looking at the Sphinx. During this expedition, this is where the Rosetta Stone is found. It's actually the British that capture it after Napoleon has found it. There's this false belief by some people that Napoleon destroyed the nose on the Sphinx, but that's British propaganda from the time. What's going to really do win this mission is disease. There are a bunch of diseases that are not normal in France that his men are going to keep on getting. And the first picture here is showing Napoleon visiting plague victims, like bubonic plague. And he may have taken some sort of medicine that he thought gave him immunity ahead of time, but he did go and show his compassion to troops. However, then he abandons his troops. Okay, but he's been sending positive things about Egypt back to France. He's kept on getting more and more popular. And then so we get an event of the coup of 18 Brumaire. So again, this is an event where you're going by the old Republican calendar, November 9th, 1799. It's kind of complicated. but he works with the Directory. He shows back up in Paris, and he works with some members of the Directory to pull off this coup. And his brother Lucien is in the legislature. They're able to make this work, in which Napoleon is set as first consul. And there's 3 consuls. There's first, second, and third. And the way they end up writing out this constitution is that the first consul basically has all the power. Napoleon's going to really like having referendums in which people vote on this. So in 1800, there is a French constitutional referendum. And the question is, should France ratify the new constitution with Napoleon as first consul for life? And the alleged results are over 3 million people, 99.94% yes. A few thousand here just saying no. But his brother, oversaw the vote. All right, then there's Napoleonic Wars, and these fuse in with the French Revolutionary Wars of all these different coalitions. And in most of these, it follows a pretty simple pattern. Even before Napoleon is involved, it's that the majority of Europe declares war against revolutionary France. Against all odds, revolutionary France wins, gets concessions, gets land from several of the people. The British refuse to ever quit fighting. They form a new coalition. It goes again and again. So you have the war of the first, second coalition. Then 1799, Napoleon becomes first consul. Then we got these other wars of the third, fourth, fifth coalition, the sixth coalition, and the seventh coalition is the one that's finally going to completely defeat Napoleon, but it takes him several different times. And so without going into detail about all those different wars and the specifics there, Napoleon is going to make a huge amount of changes at home in France. He's going to create a Ministry of Police with Joseph Fouché as its leader. And there's a huge spying aspect of this, of a secret police element, but it's also kind of unifying law enforcement across all of France. He's going to really push for the positions based on merit and not family line. It's not something completely unique to Napoleon, but Napoleon really, despite any personal prejudice you might have, is going to go off if you're skilled at your job. So we have an example of like Thomas Alexander Dumas. He's the father of the guy that writes Three Musketeers. And he's mixed race, from the Caribbean. And his appearance would be like he was black. And Napoleon's going to promote him. He's going to use him well. He's going to redo Paris, improve the sidewalks, the sewers, and the water supply. Paris is supposed to be designed now kind of be anti-barricade and able to shoot cannonballs down the streets in case of a riot. He establishes a postal service in France. He made up with the Pope. Napoleon himself is not much of a pious Catholic, but he understood how important religion could be as a tool of control and the geopolitical setting here. And this includes like saving Notre Dame Cathedral from destruction. However, he kept the seized seized land and the properties from the Catholic Church. And the Catholic Church had just a ton of land in France before the Revolution. He's also going to make the Napoleonic Code, where he's going to unify all the laws within France. So universal law for all of France. Everyone has equality before the law. There's no more serfdom. So this is codifying this. Everyone the right to property. This set a separation of church and state and allow people the freedom to choose their work. Most law codes today are going to follow either a common law system from Great Britain or a civil law system out of France. And the Napoleonic Code is the base for it. So during these things, even as first consul, Napoleon is going to lead his military. So he's going to be away from Paris a lot. But eventually, in 1804, Napoleon becomes emperor. So the Pope is there to give him the crown, but it's Napoleon who crowns himself. So big change in France there, right? Revolution starts in 1789. They go through all these changes. They kill the king and the queen, only end up with another monarchy. So two wives. First is Josephine. Josephine is, when Napoleon meets her, she is a widow. Her husband had been killed in the Reign of Terror. And so eventually, Napoleon marries her. She is older than him, so in the marriage certificate, Napoleon lies about his age, says it's higher than it is. She lies about her age, says it's lower than it is. And they get married, and then immediately start being unfaithful to one another. He finds out she's cheating on him when he's in Egypt, so he takes his own mistress there. And eventually, though, he will marry Marie Louise as his second wife after his divorce. And she is the daughter of the Emperor of Austria. So that is going to be, even if Napoleon is royal by kind of a weird right of conquest way, any kids that he's going to have with her are going to be undeniably royal in the eyes of the rest of Europe. So if we are going to talk about a battle, the kind of culminating thing is the Battle of Austerlitz, or known as the Battle of the Three Emperors, right? And so this is occurring in what is today the Czech Republic. By this point, it's part of the Austrian Empire. And it's called Three Emperors because you have Emperor Napoleon. Okay? And then you have the Tsar of Russia, Alexander I, and then you have the Emperor of Austria, the Holy Roman Emperor, Francis II. And Napoleon is going to defeat both of them. The Russians and the Austrians have a lot of communication issues. And this will eventually lead to the dissolution of the Holy Roman Empire. It's also going to lead to Napoleon eventually marrying Marie Louise. Like, he so defeated her father, he was like, okay, you're head of the Holy Roman Empire. That thing's done, and I'm going to marry your daughter. So the Holy Roman Empire, which is this big hodgepodge state with very messy borders that has existed since Charlemagne, will be dissolved. And this new German state will be the Confederation of the Rhine. During all of these wars, Spain had been an initial enemy of France, but then become an ally after losing a war against them. But Napoleon mistrusts their Bourbon leaders, who are relatives of the removed royal family in France. So eventually, he is going to just simply take over Spain and put his brother, Joseph, on that throne. They're not going to take this very well in Spain. Have you ever heard the term guerrilla warfare? Or this non-conventional warfare? It's from the guerrillas that are going to be fighting, continuing to fight against Napoleon's brother there. But eventually we get to this point where we have a height of his power, where the stuff in dark green is areas that he directly controls, and then he indirectly controls the areas in light green, either through having one of his brothers on the throne or through alliances, but he controls much of Europe. And the one that always keeps on holding out is Great Britain. And it's really hard to actually invade England. Napoleon has some ideas, he never actually puts them into motion. But he's trying to squeeze them out economically. And so is the continental system that says no one on the continent can trade with Great Britain. Russia originally says they're going to follow this, and then they're not. So in 1812, Napoleon's going to lead a French invasion of Russia. And Russia puts up a fight. Okay, you have the Battle of Borodino, where it's 135,000 on the French side, 160,000 on the Russian side. This is the last Russian defense of Moscow. It's a French victory. Enormous amount of casualties. Overall, 35,000 casualties. And so for most of these battles and these wars, what Napoleon does is they have these battles, and then when he's victorious, he marches into the capital of the country, and he demands concessions. Okay, he did that with Prussia. They lost a lot of their land. They allowed their leaders to stay on the throne. He did that with Austria, okay, where he went to Vienna, and they do concessions. So this is just how the warfare works. So he expects to march into Moscow, be met with the Tsar, and the Tsar and him were going to talk, and there would be concessions. France was not going to occupy Russia, control it, but he's going to make sure it goes through. So Napoleon takes Moscow, and it's empty. The city has been evacuated. And so he waits for a while for the Tsar to show up, be a man, do negotiations, and he doesn't. And this is going to be the start of Napoleon's downfall, because then Russia gets their greatest general in the winter. Napoleon's forces are going to start getting depleted on his way back, and a new coalition is going to be formed. And this coalition is going to actually defeat Napoleon. And the question is what to do with Napoleon, because he's very dangerous. Some people just want to kill him. The answer is you can't, because these wars are being fought over the fact that the French killed their king and queen, and so this would be a bad precedent. So what they do is they put him in the Mediterranean, the island of Elba, off of Italy. And he keeps his title of emperor. He's the emperor of Elba, and objectively, he's in charge of this island. But he's stuck there. And they try to put the brother of the old king back on the throne. But then we have plot twist. Napoleon escapes Elba and arrives into mainland France. And the French military is sent to intercept him. And this was to arrest him. So he goes, and there's thousands of men ahead of him. And he stands up and he says to them, "If any one of you would like to shoot your emperor, do it now." Okay? Daring to do it. None of them do it. In fact, they change sides and they go onto his side. And this happens along the way where he had such personal loyalty from his troops. They are defecting, going to his side. He's marching towards Paris. Okay, and the Bourbon king flees, and Napoleon goes back into power. And the time that he's back into power is roughly 100 days. That's why they call it 100 days. So then there's another final coalition, the seventh coalition, where all these different countries declare war on him. Napoleon is not just going to wait. So he meets them at Waterloo, which is today in Belgium, June 18th, 1815. And it's him against everyone else. It's the UK, Prussia, Netherlands, all these people. He is outnumbered, and ultimately, he is defeated. So again, same question, what to do with him. I feel like they can't kill him. So he is exiled again, this time to St. Helena, which is this British-controlled island in the middle of the Atlantic. He is stripped of all of his titles. He's not in charge of anything there. He's going to have to live out in exile, and a new Bourbon king is going to return to be on the throne. And then eventually, after a few years in exile, Napoleon will die from stomach cancer. So there are people at the time that thought the British may be poisoning him. So a man that completely redefined the map of Europe. And they try to fix it. Okay? In the Congress of Vienna, they try to undo all the changes Napoleon did. And technically, they did the majority of that, resetting the borders of status quo. However, there are things that Napoleon did, like unifying Italy in his conquest, unifying the states of Germany in his conquest, that put in ideas that can't be removed. While he was controlling Spain and putting his brother on the throne, there are all these revolutions in Latin America where the people are getting independence. You can't get that back. So the Congress of Vienna, they try to revert things to how they were, but Napoleon has just had this giant impact. And eventually, Napoleon's nephew will become president and later emperor of France himself, because the name Bonaparte still has meaning. So there are tons of things about Napoleon that I left out, because otherwise this would be hours long. This is kind of an overview, doing like a world history class about Napoleon after talking about the French Revolution.